Looking beyond the record of the Houston Texans, the Texans are 6-3. They're in firm control of the AFC South, and they are inside the playoff picture. 6-3 is a hell of a start for a Texans team. It's one of the best starts they've ever had. However, there are examples of teams winning a lot of games, but there being a gray area that leads you to believe that maybe this team is not a contender, or maybe they're not as quality of a football team as their record. I know a lot of football coaches have said you are what your record says you are. And that's one of the most famous quotes in the history of football. It was used by Bill Parcells, but it's misused constantly. You hear coaches say, well, we are what our record says we are. I think Bill O'Brien said it when the Texans were 11-5 before they got embarrassed in the playoffs, and everybody who was questioning that squad ended up looking right. The Texans right now are 6-3, but it's a very, very, very interesting, intriguing 6-3 when you line it up to the other teams in the AFC playoff picture. I'll provide those stats in a second, but first, I want to get the actual context of the line. You are what your record says you are. Yes, in the standings, you are what your record says you are, but when your goal is to make a run, when your goal is to get elite, a lot of times you win games you probably shouldn't win. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes things go your way. The Texans could easily be 2-7 right now. They could easily be 2-7 right now. But here was what Bill Parcells said back in the day. He said, you are what your record says you are. It's one of the best yet most misrepresented quotes of all time. And if you don't believe me, let's hear Bill Parcells himself explain it. He was on the Nunyo YouTube channel. He was in a diner. It's a little bit loud, but this is what Bill Parcells meant when he said this. It wasn't to justify sluggish, poor play. And the reality of the situation is, we've seen Nick Caserio, who we'll hear from in a second. We've seen D'Amico Ryans justify the obvious just because you're winning games. And eventually that'll smack you in the face. When you say that the offensive line, let's focus on the positives. When you say that poor offensive line play is overplayed, and then we see what we've seen from the Texans constantly to where CJ Stroud is put in harm's way, that's not looking at the reality. That's not the Jeff Van Gundy don't ignore in victory what you would not ignore in defeat. Bill Parcells was basically saying the same thing, but don't take my word for it. Let's hear from the man himself. Here was Bill Parcells on the Nunner YouTube channel talking about what he meant when he said that line that so many coaches misrepresent these days.
I don't remember these things, you are what you are. That eliminates the people rationalizing that things are different than the actuality. Say, well, we could have been this. If it was only for this, we could have had it. That's not what happened. What happened was the results that you now have to accept and realize that that's the basis of the truth of this particular endeavor. So whether it be on a yearly basis or a weekly basis or over a period of time, your record says, it tells you, like I said, the game tells you what you are.
It was used for the coulda, woulda, shoulda game. We could have won this game if we could easily be this. That quote was not used for the Giants. Let me put it this way. If the Giants had been 6-3 like the Texans are right now, and they'd played the same way and it had looked the same way, do you think Bill Parcells in his right mind is going to go up there and say, you are what your record says you are? Absolutely not. So when you look at this Texans team and you look at what the expectations are and you look at what the expectations should be, that's the other thing. This team has the talent to play high quality football. This team has the talent to win games that maybe they shouldn't. And that's the beauty of this. There's still a lot of season left. But if they're going to continue to do what they've done 9 weeks through the season, and they're going to continue to neglect the obvious on the offensive line, then it's not going to end well. Much like it didn't end well in Deshaun Watson's second year. And the worst outcome possible could happen. If this offensive line were, if the equivalent of this was going on D'Amico Ryans' defense, it wouldn't fly. And quite frankly, if the offense were as coached as well as the defense, it wouldn't fly either. You would have enough. You'd probably have a top 10, top 5 offense. But that's not what they've had. But you are what your record says it is. That's Bill Parcells did not mean that as justification. He meant that as not justifying failures and shortcomings. A win is a win. You want to win. You don't want to apologize for winning if you're the Texans. There's no desire for them to apologize for being where they are. But you can look past the result. And to say we are what our record says we are, sure, in a literal sense you are. But you're disrespecting football royalty. You're disrespecting the great Bill Parcells when you start misusing that damn quote. Because that's damn sure not what he meant. It is a locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. I am Landry Locker. You can hear me and see me here. I'm on the scene at Texans Practice Daily. I'm on SNL with Cody Stutes, who's also on the digital beat as well, every morning, 9 a.m. And then Fridays at 4 p.m. after the final injury report is dropped. So be sure to follow along, ride along for the best Texans coverage in the game. I want to get into I just want to give a visual of the Texans and where they are right now, 9 weeks into the season compared to other teams in the playoff picture. And I promise you, I have some good news. I also gotta address Nick Caserio and something he said earlier this week. And I think there's something that, despite the fact that we're very pleased with where Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans are, there's something going on, and we got to figure out, we got to get to the bottom of it, because if the Texans are going to reach their goals, then they're going to need the offensive line to perform better. And I'm not quite sure who to blame. There's probably plenty to go around, but the words of Nick Caserio and the words of D'Amico Ryans have been bizarre at the bare minimum. So right now you have the Texans who've played 9 games. Their plus minus is +1, which means they've outscored their opponents by 1 point. That's not good. In baseball, plus minus, it means probably a little bit more. But in football, it's not good to have a +1 in the plus minus area. That's not great, especially over 9 ball games. On one hand, you can say, well, this team knows how to win. On the other hand, you can say, well, maybe they're just kind of out-talenting some squads. But just to put that in perspective, let's go through the other 6 teams that are in the playoff picture right now. If the playoffs started today, the Texans would be in the playoffs with a +1 point differential through 9 ball games. The Buffalo Bills, they are at +84 through 8 games. Texans caught the Bills at a pretty good time. The Bills were pretty banged up. The Bills are +84 through 8 games, as opposed to the Texans +1 through 9 games. Pittsburgh Steelers +68 through 8 games, as opposed to the Texans +1 through 9 games. Kansas City Chiefs +50 through 7 games. You talk about the Chiefs, people are not impressed with what they're doing. They got the pedigree. They're undefeated, and they're +50 through 7 games. And people aren't happy with how sluggish they've been. Denver Broncos +53 through 8 games. The Baltimore Ravens +33 through 8 games. And then you have the Chargers at +41 through 7 games. So other teams are consistently, and they're avoiding getting blown out, which good teams don't get blown out as bad as the Texans did to the Vikings. There might be a loss here or there, but that was just pure dominance, and it's connected to the problem that has been lingering for a while. However, don't tell that to Nick Caserio. And I promise you, we got some good news. We're going to put a bow on what went down in New York, with some negatives, some positives. Look at Kenyon Green, the status of Kenyon Green, who they announced will be out for the season, most likely. But let's hear from Nick Caserio. He was on the Texans YouTube channel, and this was kind of around the same time when D'Amico Ryans said, let's focus on the positives of the offensive line. People are too negative. And then this was coming off a performance in which the Texans won the game, despite the fact the pressure was worse in that game than it was in Green Bay, which was a complete disaster, which happened to be before the game that CJ Stroud got sacked 8 times and pressured over 20, and probably should have been sacked more than 8 times. So you have D'Amico Ryans kind of saying, let's focus on the positives. And you have Nick Caserio saying this. Let's hear Nick Caserio, the GM of the Houston Texans. He's done a hell of a job. He's gotten you out of football hell a lot quicker than you could have assumed. He might have a really strong weakness, though, when it comes to a very important area. Let's hear Nick Caserio with the great John Harris and Mark Vandermeer breaking down the offensive line issues.
You know, we had our moments in times where CJ was able to maneuver in the pocket. He made a number of plays the other day where he kind of found some space and was able to deliver the ball. So playing quarterback is part of playing quarterback is playing with a little bit of a dirty pocket. So I also think, we've got to be careful of painting a picture about the offensive line. We certainly had our moments. I mean, we ran for I don't know how many yards. We threw for 280 yards. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives. So the things that we have to get fixed, we're going to look at those and figure out a way to get them fixed. So, but sometimes you got to give a credit to the defense as well, because sometimes they have a call that's conducive to that situation that maybe doesn't match up with what you have called offensively. So that's the way it goes. So that group cares a lot. The coaches care a lot. So always looking for ways to improve. And if there's an opportunity for us to do that, then yeah, we will.
All right. And that's a big problem with what they're saying. It's not always what they're saying. It's what they do. They're saying this and then they're doing it and they're putting CJ Stroud in harm's way. And this is probably the third time that I heard Bobby Slowick say it. I heard D'Amico say it. And I heard Nick Caserio say, well, we ran the play and they didn't give us the look that they thought they would give us. Is there any audibling? Is there any adjusting? Is that supposed to make you feel better? Do they just know what the hell you're going to do? Because that to me sounds like you're either predictable or you're not adjusting at the line of scrimmage when you see what the look is. That's a little bit troubling. But here's the other thing about Nick Caserio when it comes to the offensive line. Nick Caserio's done a lot of great things. He did a really good job. His plan has played out. I think he's a good general manager. I think he's an evolving general manager. I don't think he's stuck in his ways. I don't think he's stubborn by any stretch of the imagination. I think that the Patriot Way stuff was way, way overblown. But Nick Caserio, when it comes to offensive line and evaluation, has been a disaster. I tweeted this out earlier today, and I stand by this. Nick Caserio is very healthy. I don't think he's eaten a fried food in the last decade. He's got a strict diet. He doesn't pig out on Thanksgiving. I would trust Nick Caserio with junk food recommendations more than I would his offensive line evaluation. Every way in which you can evaluate the offensive line, Nick Caserio has failed at, or at least has problems. Laramie Tunsil was already here. He gave Laramie Tunsil his contract. I know he leads the league in penalties, but if you had 5 Laramie Tunsils on your offensive line, you might be undefeated. Penalties involved. If everybody did their job as good as Laramie Tunsil, you might be undefeated. He gave Titus Howard the extension. He drafted Kenyon Green in the first round. He brought in Shaq Mason, gave Shaq Mason an extension. He drafted Juice Scruggs in the second round. He's invested a hell of a lot in this offensive line, and it's been bad. And quite frankly, in New England, there's always talk about, what did Nick Caserio do? What were his responsibilities? And I think that's kind of a hard thing to say when you're dealing with a unique, all-time great situation like that. But the one thing I know, he didn't do much with that offensive line. Tom Brady was directing that offensive line. They have one of the best offensive line coaches of all time. So it's not like we can sit there and say he had a lot to do with that. They might have drafted guys or whatever, but he's drafted guys and this offensive line struggling. So I say all that to say there doesn't need to be some mansplaining when it comes to the obvious. Sometimes, for whatever reason, coaches, general managers, they dig in on these types of things, and the fans end up being right every once in a while. I know coaches sometimes want to say, well, hindsight's 20/20. Yeah, it is. But fans also have opinions in the mix. They know the game. They follow the game. They know what's going on. A lot of media does as well. And this offensive line issue, it's been talked about throughout the entire season while the Texans were winning games. And all the while, D'Amico Ryans, Caserio, and Bobby Slowick were kind of defending it to a certain point. It was kind of up and down, but for the most part, they leaned on defending it, which is fine in public, but they also really haven't made any significant changes. And the actions kind of back that up. And the game plan's not being called to where you have a reality or a grasp of what your offensive line is. And the worst part about it is not only is it stopping you from reaching your ultimate goals, it's putting the face of your franchise and the quarterback in harm's way. So they need to figure that out. They need to figure that out when it comes to the offensive line. And if D'Amico Ryans is trusting Bobby Slowick too much and Bobby Slowick's not getting the job done, maybe D'Amico needs to do something. If they need to change things around, whether that means putting Titus Howard back at guard, which, by the way, he might have been better at guard than he is at tackle. He hadn't really played that good at tackle either. If it means that, and then putting Blake Fisher at right tackle, so be it. If it means putting Kendrick Green at left guard or Jared Patterson, so be it. But some things and probably a lot of things need to change. There's not just one problem. It's not just a Kenyon Green thing. But Nick Caserio, I trust a lot about Nick Caserio. I think the franchise is in good hands. I don't trust Nick Caserio when it comes to offensive line evaluation one bit and really evaluating offensive line play. Maybe that changes, but the body of work we have so far, it's been piss poor. And there's no gray area to that. It's been trash. And it hasn't played out on the field. Matter of fact, when your offensive line isn't healthy, last year they played better than this one. So, yeah, we don't have to be careful, contrary to what Nick Caserio said last Friday about evaluating the offensive line. The offensive line's been bad. Hopefully that was an awakening for him, and he figures something out regardless of what it is, because it's been bad. And he and D'Amico are going to have to do something about it. And maybe D'Amico's going to have to oversee and take Bobby Slowick to task a little bit more, because if that offense was as coached as well as D'Amico's defense is, I mean, my God, you'd be in good shape right now. You'd be cooking. We wouldn't be having this damn conversation. Final observations about the New York Jets beatdown. Goodness gracious, pause. But the beatdown before we get out of here, and there are some decent things in here. Number one, Kenyon Green. Couple of things here. Was Kenyon Green ever going to come out of the game had he not gotten hurt? That's kind of scary to think about, but it is something to think about. We now know that Kenyon Green's season is over, and I just want to say this. I've admired Kenyon Green's accountability. I've admired his work ethic. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, and a lot of times it doesn't work out early, and you find your groove. I think a change of scenery for Kenyon Green would be great. I think even if he'd been healthy, I don't even know that you can play him as a backup guard here, but Kenyon Green, he's going to get another chance. Hopefully it's somewhere else, and hopefully he turns it around, because despite how poor he has performed, Kenyon Green is an easy young man to root for, and I wish him nothing but the best. It was a bad pick by Nick Caserio, poor evaluation, which is kind of constant with him when it comes to the offensive line, but I wish Kenyon Green the best. Number two, this game should have been worse. Like, as frustrating as that game was against the Jets, that game could have been worse. You had a guy drop the ball at the 1 yard line. CJ Stroud, I know he got sacked 8 times. He probably could have been sacked 20 times. I thought he did a really good job using his legs yesterday and extending plays and giving the Texans a chance. I thought he was elite at that. This game could have been a lot worse than it was, if not for the efforts of CJ Stroud. And I know he missed some throws, but do you connect that perhaps to the pressure and getting thrown down to that nasty ass surface 8 times, the same place where you had a concussion? He was banged up a couple of times. Did he need to hit John Mechie? Sure. But the reality is the Texans, you look at the score, you say, oh, they lost by 8 points. It was a 1-possession game. Now they got their ass kicked a lot worse than that. It could have been worse. Number 3, something good, Tank Dell. We got a Tank Dell breakout game, which you're going to need. He is wide receiver 2 right now with Nico Collins coming back against Detroit. Same wide receiver core as last year. You're going to need him to step up. Now, they did feel a need to make the Stefon Diggs trade with this same wide receiver core, plus Noah Brown. But Tank Dell, seeing him do some good things. The 50-yard catch, the response after the Jets scored was good. Tank Dell, is good to see him break out. They're going to need Tank Dell. They're going to need Nico Collins. Although, as CJ Stroud said yesterday, it might not matter who you have at wide receiver if you can't run the offense. Number 4, this was interesting. J.J. Taylor, RB2. And this is kind of connected to the offensive line. My co-host on SNL, Cody Stutes, insists that Dameon Pierce, when he comes back, they'll put him right back at RB2. You sure we need to do that? You know, last year we saw Dameon Pierce. He was kind of unplayable. He's kind of found a place as a kickoff returner. It looks like J.J. Taylor gave you some pop yesterday. It seemed like a perfect compliment for Joe Mixon. Could have had a long run, kind of got tackled by the turf monster. Are they going to actually give J.J. Taylor the opportunity? Are they just going to continue rolling with Dameon Pierce? Goes back to the questions about the offensive staff and being able to look past result and not fall in love with players. Are they going to do that? That's something to keep an eye on. And then number 5, Danico Autry. Danico Autry has arrived. We were waiting to see when he would knock the rust off. Yesterday, he had 2 sacks. Will Anderson, banged up, playing elite. Danielle Hunter, playing good. You mix a little Danico Autry in there, and you're going to get Mario Edwards Jr. back. You got Tim Settle having damn near a career year. The D-line is going to keep you in a lot of games. They did an excellent job yesterday of trying to keep the Texans in this game, and it was nice to see Danico Autry come back. Final thoughts, the Lions. The Lions are coming to town, which is not ideal. You do get the long rest. The Lions are coming to town. I think D'Amico's defense is going to be close to full strength. They're going to have Jimmy Ward back, most likely. You're going to have Aziz Al-Shire back. and you're going to be facing one of the best offenses in the NFL. So D'Amico versus Ben Johnson, going to be exciting to see. That's the good news. It's Sunday Night Football. It's going to be exciting. But here's the bad news. The bad news is the Lions, they're plus minus. We talked about the Texans being +1 through 9 games. The Lions plus minus through 7 games, they're plus 100. That's a 99 differential, and they've played 2 less games. Got positive a little bit there. It's hard to be positive after you get beat down like that. But the good news is we got a long time before the Texans play. We get a weekend to enjoy. Just sit back and watch some ball. I'm going to be in Las Vegas. Appreciate everyone for coming through. Be sure to join me live 10:30 every single night right here in the locker room. Shout out to the chat. I am just now landing in Las Vegas, and I will keep you all posted on what goes down there. SNL Monday at 9 a.m. Join as usual, and stay tuned for the practice updates, everything else. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Thanks for pulling up to the locker room.
Landlock, got the game in the headlock. Localize every time. Can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not 2. Plugged in daily digital.